Okay. Um, so starting over, first call in September. We're halfway through the month of September, and we have really interesting data in this deck that particularly in the air charter slide. It's an uptick that we haven't seen in a really long, long time. When we look at this, I mean, the air charter market over the past 2 weeks or the first half of September was up 7%. Now, I was pretty happy last month that the year over year was, approaching zero, right? And that the first half of August we saw a little bit of a positive bump. And so those were sort of good early signs. This is an even more dramatic sign that we're seeing, a real uptick in traffic. This is historically what we would see, pre-COVID, we would see a softer summer, and then come September, everybody was in, let's get stuff done before the end of the year mode. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I also believe that the first half of the year, um, there was just a lot of uncertainty, and folks didn't, really feel confident in going out there and doing things. Interestingly, I don't think the uncertainty's gone away. We still have a war in Ukraine, and we still have other, many of the same things. The tariff issues are still out there, but I think, in the folks I talk to, it's just the market, society, everyone in general has just sort of accepted the fact that there's this new level of uncertainty, and it doesn't stop the fact that you got to go get things done in your business and in your personal life. So, um, the fact is, I think there's just a mentality that is, we just got to get on with it, and that is a very good thing for us. So here's what, the charter number here, for this month, and you can see that it sort of is hockey sticking up because of the positive number. It's certainly the best, um, best performance in recent history for sure. Now we'll just have to see if that follows, but I don't see any reason that it wouldn't. I mean, October is also historically a strong month. It's better than September. There's nothing that I'm seeing that would say that the rest of September isn't also going to be strong. Part 91 also up, although it's a little different because the year-to-date trend was up to begin with, but we're at 9.1%, which is the biggest increase year over year that we've seen there either as well. So it wasn't just a charter thing. This is, the whole market being up, and you can see that in this black trend line that we have. So the combined traffic, obviously, if the other two things are up, I mean, if 91 and 135 are up, then the combined traffic is going to be up. So, it's just very positive all the way around. Then when we get into size classes, unfortunately, with all of this good news, it hasn't been enough to take the light jet size class into positive territory, but it is doing better than it has year to date. So we have a minus 7.8% year to date trend, and we're only down 1.8%. So take it, that's a nice improvement from what we have been seeing, even though we haven't quite turned it around. That said, the rest of the size classes are a different story. They are all in strong positive territory. So the mids are up 6.5%. Super mids, because they were already doing so well, haven't seen quite the same bump, and they're up 2.4%. Large cabin, which, as we all know, is the most expensive category we have in the space, is up 13.2%. That's a really good sign when you see the top of the market doing really well. And then here are the turboprops that are also in really good shape. And it's quite a contrast, for the second half of the year versus the first half of the year in terms of where the turboprop traffic is going. So when we look at our major markets, here is Los Angeles, including the airlines. It's up 9.1% when we take the airlines out. A lot of that historically has been due to runway construction in Van Nuys. However, that is really behind us. And you can see here that even Van Nuys, which has been trailing prior years for quite some time, is actually up for the month of September, month to date. So that's very good to see. Here's LaGuardia with our airline traffic. That's up 1.2% in terms of the scheduled airlines there. Here's Teterboro up 6.3%. So big, strong performance out of Teterboro first half of the month. And then here is White Plains up 17.5% against an 11.6% year-to-date trend. So, breakaway volume there. Newark, the trouble there is sort of consistent. The airlines just pulled back travel or sorry, schedules and whatnot. And, this particular slide is including airline data too, just as a comparison to see what's happening overall there, especially with that air traffic control shift to Philly from New York. And for whatever reason, airlines make changes over a long period of time, and they have not chosen to put their schedules back. But you can see through Teterboro, which is really right next door, the controllers are doing a good job. I think they've solved the networking issues that were at the root cause of some of those outages that were there. I happened to fly in there myself in a Bonanza yesterday, and I got awesome service from the controllers there, and nobody seemed, I mean, it's busy, but nobody seemed overly stressed. So that was good. Here's Farmingdale up 25.2%, which is really crazy. That is becoming a more and more popular satellite airport for the New York metro area. And in September so far, they've doubled their month-to-date trend versus the year-to-date. And then here is Morristown. Numbers here are going to be a little bit wacky because, they had that runway closure and all of that, but you can see that they're up 27.4% over last year. Then here's Chicago, and we're looking at Chicago Midway. Slightly different story when we're looking at the airlines there. They're off 2%. Pull the airlines out, and we're up 11.8. So the BizAv traffic into downtown Chicago is pretty strong. Even Milwaukee out in the suburbs is doing well and beating their year-to-date trend, but just marginally, not by quite as much. Then here is Atlanta, and Atlanta is going to be interesting. This is obviously all the airline traffic in there to start with, which is up marginally at 0.3%. But then we've got this real breakout here, which is actually a direct result of a runway project that's going on at Peachtree DeKalb. I put a link to the construction project into the chat if you want to look at that for this call. And then here is Peachtree, where you can see the traffic is off by 43.6%, and that's because I think their main runway is shut down for a significant period of time for resurfacing. Here's Boston, off 2.9% with the seasonal dip in airline activity. When we pull out the airlines, we're up 8.1%, which is less than the year-to-date trend, but still obviously good numbers. Here is Bedford, our suburban airport there, and it's up 10.6% compared with a 0.9% negative trend prior to this month. So things have really turned around there. Some of that is, I think, when you have a good summer and we are back to normal summer patterns, people in Greater Boston actually like sticking around home and don't travel as much for personal reasons over the summer. So now they're back to it with the business travel that happens out of Bedford. Here is Reagan National. And you can see the airline traffic there is up 3.3%. As I say, every time we talk about this slide, we don't break out the GA because there really isn't enough of it at this airport. It's so difficult to get in there. And then here's Dulles for all traffic, up 4.7%. And then here's Dulles for general aviation or BizAv. And you'll notice that it's not meeting its year-to-date trend. So things did taper off a little bit here, interestingly, but we're still in positive territory. It's still, a few hundred additional flights for this first 2 weeks. Manassas, on the other hand, it wasn't its busiest week, but it had a peak at 100. There was 120 operations there, which for that airport is abnormally high, and we're at 23% against a 19.7% year-to-date trend. So the numbers there are increasing, if anything. Here is Charlotte with the airlines, and this is just, there's been a schedule reduction there on the part of American. When we pull out the airlines, you can see we're up 1.5%. So there's still a slight increase year over year, but it's not in keeping with the year-to-date trend. And then here are our second home cities. So this is typical. Traffic falls off a cliff, at the end after Labor Day here in the Hamptons, and you can see it followed that pattern. We are 4.6% ahead of last year within that pattern. The dips here weren't as deep as they were in the past. That's how that happened. Then when we go out to Colorado and ski country, you can see that with the airlines, traffic was up 2.9%. Without them, traffic was still up 1.8% in Aspen. And then off 5.7% with the airlines in Eagle, and off 4.5% on the GA side. So slightly weaker month in Eagle / Vail. Here's Denver Centennial, suburban Denver's Biz Ave Airport, off 2%. And then here is Nantucket. Both of the islands off the coast of Massachusetts have had really strong seasons. Nantucket is holding strong at 24.8% so far for this month, compared with an 11% year-to-date trend. And then we have almost the same numbers from a percentage basis. There's an awful lot more jet activity into Nantucket than there is into Martha's Vineyard. But on a percentage basis, Martha's Vineyard is also up 24% against sort of an 11% year-to-date trend. So very popular places so far in September. Indian summer and all that. Here is Napa, also popular. We've got a month to date of 16.1 against a 1.6% year-to-date trend. So a lot of positive movement there. And then here is Bandon Dunes, up 25%, over 100 flights. Obviously, we're talking smaller total flight numbers with some of these airports, but it's still a good trend, no matter how you look at it. Now, here is Scottsdale, and there are days where I just don't know how they're going to get more activity in there with the one runway they have, but somehow managed to do it with 15.2% year-over-year bump in traffic, which is 10%, more than 10% above the 4.9% year-to-date trend. So as the weather has shifted, people are going back into Scottsdale. And then here is Jackson Hole, coming off of their summer peak back into a shoulder season, as they call it, and up 22.7%, so a pretty strong shoulder. Here's Hilton Head, GA only, and that's a slightly different story. Did not have the spikes here that happened last year, and we're in a 2.2% negative situation. But the airport as a whole has been doing really well for this year. Here's Addison, still positive, up 3.5%, not quite at the 9% that they've been doing as a year-to-date trend. Here's Dallas, up 1.5% compared to a -2% year-to-date trend. So still positive territory. Oh, and I should have fast forwarded to the GA. So we're in even better territory there, up 6.6% on the GA side in Dallas, which makes more sense. Here's Opelika, up 8.1%, which is beating the 6.3% year-to-date trend, and we're just chugging along, and things start to pick up as it gets a little bit colder in the Northeast, specifically in Boston, and New York. There's so much New York to Opelika traffic, right? Teterboro to Opelika is one of the busiest routes, in the industry, and we're going to start to see that pick back up here in the next month or so. Here's Fort Lauderdale International, including the airlines, and we are off 7% with airline traffic there, up 2.9% in GA, which is a significant decrease from the 19.4% year-to-date trend. That said, I think, as I've discussed on many other calls, the spikes earlier in the year were due to presidential TFRs, with the president going into Palm Beach and shifting traffic down south, and we just haven't been seeing those recently. Here's Fort Lauderdale Exec, up 8.5%. Nice traffic numbers for this airport. And then here's Naples, off 2.9%. It's a little bit of a head scratcher with all the other, I guess, leisure destination airports that we're seeing do well. It's interesting that Naples is off a little bit. And then here is West Palm for all traffic and West Palm for GA. So this is another one that's, not following the trend we're seeing at most of leisure destinations. partly because we're out of season. You know, when the weather is good up north, people don't travel to their places down south. And I think that's really probably the number one reason for that. Now, here is Nassau and the Bahamas, and a lot of the Nassau traffic is coming from places that are already warm, you know, just going to from warm and not tropical to warm and tropical in the Bahamas. And you can see it's up 1.7%, which is not as good as the 6.3% year-to-date trend, but it's still nothing to shake a stick at. It's always better to be in positive territory than not. Um, so let's see, sorry. Uh, we're going to run through the Houston airports. We added these for a while. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep them in or not, but we just did a little focus on the Houston market. And you can see here that for Houston Hobby, up 11.5%. For David Wayne Hooks, we're off 1.5%, so slightly different story. Sugarland, 11.6 compared with a 13.8% year-to-date trend. Conroe is off 27.7%. So I have not had an opportunity to dig in and try and understand what might be going on there, whether there's construction or something else, but maybe somebody on the call can shoot me a text or a note on that. Something's changed there. So then let's look at our top 50 routes. And if we look at this here, very interesting to see Bedford Teterboro on the top of the list. We are still seeing Van Nuys Teterboro, our Transcon route, very high. And then we're also seeing Teterboro to Dulles. So New York to Washington, D.C. Continues to be a pretty heavily trafficked route. You can see that the top routes have a higher concentration than we've seen for a while. Over the summer, this sort of fades out, and we might have 400 or 500 flights in the top 50. Now we're up to 825, which is much stronger. So we'll see how that pattern rolls. You know, clearly not an awful lot of Florida when you look at the fact that you know, with the exception of the Teterboro, Opelika, we're not seeing a lot of that traffic in the, you know, the top 25. So fuel, you know, I use a feature of Excel to put this together, and sometimes it sort of makes things look wackier than they are, because the changes in price are not as dramatic as it looks on this chart. I mean, they all did move in an upward direction across every location, with the exception of, is it Nevada stayed the same, but even Nevada is getting a sort of a pink shade in this scenario. And it is Illinois at 15%, sorry, 15 cents a gallon increase that's taking the cake. And then we have some other states that are at 11, well, 11, 12, 13%, sorry, 11, 12 or 13 cents. So those aren't big, you know, swings that are as big as what this chart by color makes it seem. And there hasn't been any, not that we would expect any sort of major shift in where gas is inexpensive versus expensive. You can see that the center of the country, Nebraska and Oklahoma, are some of the cheapest places, and Kansas are some of the cheapest places to buy fuel, while Rhode Island, Colorado, and Alaska are some of the most expensive. So that's the deck. If you have anything you'd like me to go back over and look at again, you can, you know, put a comment in the chat or unmute yourself. Happy to go back and revisit a slide or something. I do have the ability to pull any slide on pretty much any ICAO code or any FAA airport code in the US. I'm traveling today, so I can't do that in real time, but if there was something that you wanted to see that I didn't have in the deck, you can shoot me a note. If you would like a copy of the deck, you can shoot me a note at greg@tivoli.com, and we will get you a copy of that. And then that's it. I'm trying to remember to record these calls for some of the folks that can't make it every Thursday. So I did at least remember to do that today. So, but of course, you guys are the cool kids that made the call. So that's that. If anybody has anything else they want to bring up with the group or whatnot, this is your opportunity. Otherwise, we will chat again in early October, when we will have a real sense of the full month of September, and we will be just a couple weeks away from NBAA in Vegas. So with that, I'm not seeing anybody jump into chat right now, so we will call it for this week. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll talk to you all again in a couple of weeks with some additional data where I think you're going to find that the month of September was really strong. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
You bet, Steve. Brecken, nobody has guessed correctly. That was Orlando Executive Airport. Yep, you nailed it. Yep. All right. So if I was giving away prizes, you know what? If you're coming to MBAA, I'll give you special socks for picking that. All right. Take care, everybody. Talk to you in a couple weeks.